into, advance, to move forward. Fire, primal power, all-consuming. Battle, a struggle, success or failure. Unto, to be placed upon until death. Anvil, the creator of all, unyielding. War, to kill or be killed, life and death. These are the words of the 18th Legiones Astartes, the Fireborn of Nocturne, the Salamanders, and the teaching of the Drake Lord, the Flame Bearer, Lord of Prometheus, the Primarch Vulkan, and this is their story. For into the fires of battle, and unto the anvil of war! The towering might of a space marine from Warhammer 40k is one of the most iconic images in all of science fiction media. When one imagines a soldier turned into a one-man army, a human released from the frailties of mortality, a warrior remade into an instrument of destruction, a soul capable of feats far beyond normality, a man reforged with the strength to scare demons and box the heavens. All of these and more are the very essence of a space marine. Yet despite everything pointing to the absence of flaws that define humanity, space marines are still sadly very human, and possess all the flaws and evils that plague our hallowed race. From the base and debaucherous acts of the far-fallen Emperor's children, the unadulterated savage butchery of the blood-drunk world-eaters, and the cowardly stalkers of the weak that are the Night Lords. If one was to look for evil among the Adeptus Astartes, you would not have to look very hard. However, it is not the taint of the ruinous powers, the foul gods of chaos, each one of them thrice damned devils, that makes a Space Marine evil. For there are many warrior brotherhoods of the Space Marines that regard us mortal men with sheer, utter contempt. In fact, aside from the original legions, some claim that this is the norm, for if one is raised so far above humanity, why would you ever bother to strain your neck to look down so low? Because that is why we are strong, to safeguard those who are weak. Such are hallowed oaths made in moments of trial, when the metal of demigods is thrown into the crucible of strife, and all wait and see whether a lump of slag shall come forth, or a mighty hammer, tempered by the hottest of fires. But these are not the oaths of renegades and traitors, nor are they the misguided promises of the aloof and ignorant. Nay, for words such as these, words that bear fire hot enough to burn the very stars, do not come from mere men, demigods or not. Words such as these can only come from those born of fire, those armored in mighty scales, those who are the truest protectors of the weak and the afraid, such as you and I. Dragons, the Drake Lords of time immemorial. They have gone by many names, but to the people stuck in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, those who bring the light of flame are known as the Salamanders, the demigods who sell their lives for mortal men. And this is their story. But the story is not one told in fine margins and detailed scrolls, for theirs is a story told with passion and moments of intensity, just like the flame from which they were born. So from their initial spark to their current conflagration, we shall see why these sable-skinned, crimson-eyed, fire-breathing monsters are the most human of all the Space Marines. So gaze into the blazing fire with its raging flames, and thus let the story begin, as we find out exactly what it means to be a salamander. The Salamanders, like all legions, have their origins by the hands of the Emperor of Mankind, who after a millennium of guiding humanity from the shadows, arose in the aftermath of the Age of Strife, a time when humanity had fought amongst itself and forgot what made us great. So the Master of Mankind would lead us into a new age, even if we had to be dragged, kicking and screaming. Thus did he craft warriors that could be capable of such feats. First came his custodies, warrior lords and noble princes, each and every one of them, made truly and utterly perfect. Yet only 10,000 of these souls could be maintained and crafted. So for the legions to conquer Terra, the homeworld of humanity, they would have to be made of something else. They would have to be made of thunder, and thus the Thunder Warriors were formed, known as the Legio Contagious, or the Thunder Legions. Mighty warriors of iron and muscle, as brutish as they were effective. For as the war for the Unification of Terra began, it would become clear that such pugilists and brawlers would not be able to conquer the stars. So a new kind of warrior was needed, and so were new generals. And thus, using arcane arts and genetic alchemy, far removed and forbidden from the clutches of man, did the Emperor craft his greatest creations, the Primarchs. For if the Emperor was king, behold now his princes. Yet such strength came at a price, and by means unknown and unknowable, they were scattered across the galaxy, far from the Emperor's grasp. Yet while the fathers of the Legion were for now lost, their sons remained. And so were the first Space Marines created. These 200 men, the greatest of men seen in generations, for these were humanity's princes, missing only their crowns. And lo, for the first Legion had come. Yet the dregs of humanity hail not from the first, for their 18th Legion is their home, and long were they separated from their brothers, together with the Wolves of the 6th, and the Hydra of the 20th Legion. These three, known as the Trefoil, each sequestered away for a special purpose only they could achieve, known only to the Emperor himself. The dregs of the 18th would be held for most of the Unification Wars, and it would seem to most that the dregs of the Emperor, known then as the Dragon Warriors, would leave Terra unbloodied. Yet, not so, for as the many warlords, mage kings, and blood despots fell one by one, from the tyrant Kalgan of Ursh, the Malud-Sen Confederacy led by their befouled priest king, to the Pan-Pacific Empire of Nathan-Doom, each one was brought underneath the banner of the Raptor and Lightning Bolt. Yet one holdup remained, stubbornly defying the will of the Lightning Lord, the Antarchy of the Caucus Wastes. While their numbers paled in comparison to the manic zealots of the Yenistic Bloc, or the bloodthirsty savages of Ursh, the Caucus Antarchy's power came from the hidden troves of relic technologies, and terrible weapons that could trace their origin back to the golden age of humanity, the time before the Age of Strife. While its military forces ranged from the armored gene-augmented Urkastis warriors, a dark mirror of the Thunder Warriors, to the narcotically enslaved covens of maddened bloodsychers, the holdfast and safeguard of the Antarchy were concealed deep beneath the hollowed-out mountains of the Caucus Wastes. This natural defense was only further improved as near-impregnable power-field shield-wave generators guarded the fell Antarch and his evils. Imperial forces had tried to destroy this blight upon Holy Terra earlier in the war, yet the steel of the Antarch was hard, and his holes were deep. Their losses were steep. Almost 10,000 Thunder Warriors and more than 1 million soldiers of the nascent Imperial army had given their lives. Yet these dreaded losses had some benefit, as the Caucus Waste would be contained and isolated from wider Terra, awaiting the Emperor's judgment, and when that time came, nothing would be left to chance. 6 entire proto-legions of the Legions Astartes, the entirety of the Legio Custodes, millions of Imperial Army soldiers, mechanized battalions and warrior bands all marching beneath the Raptor and Lightning banner of Unification, were mustered for the final assault on the Caucus Wastes. All of these would be led by the Emperor himself, yet no assault could be launched until the shield web generators were destroyed, for as long as they stood, any assault would be less than a fool's errand, so they must be destroyed. Yet they lay in the very bowels of the earth, submerged in roiling oceans of lava and slag mountains of magma, making any attack almost impossible. Almost. Known as the Legio Contagious, or the Thunder Legions. For where others cower from fire, drakes embrace it. And thus, the task of destroying the power generators fell to the 20,000 warriors of the 18th Legion. Yet this decision was not universal. The 18th was truly untested, and many wondered if such a green unit could be capable of such a mighty task, which much larger forces had failed so terribly. Yet the Emperor had faith that his dragons would brave this new hell filled with old machines, and triumph. And so, the entire of the 18th Legion launched into the bowels of the earth via 20 termite assault drills, gifts from the Red Priests of Mars. The Legion's power armor had been specifically modified for the extreme conditions, and had been camouflaged in striated patterns of sulfur yellow and sable black. And thus prepared as best they could, the Astartes boarded their craft, and the Emperor saluted the 18th Legion as they began their assault of the Tempest galleries. The journey was not without peril. 4,000 legionaries lost their lives before meeting the foe, victims of grinding tectonic plates and seas of hidden magma. Whether the defenses of Terra or the Antarchy, it is unknown. But regardless, 16,000 Astartes breached into the Tempest galleries. Yet what they found shocked them. Vast kilometer-high spindle machines, whirring Arcana Khan turned over roiling caged seas of molten metal drawn straight from the planet's very core, spewing forth massive coronas of blinding lightning while suspended on manufactured silica webs, across which unfathomable and inhuman machines scurried along it, anthropomorphized in the fashion of the arachnids of old Earth, working and guarding in equal measure. In this new fresh hell ripped straight out of myth, the 18th did not find any gene warriors or crazed psychers, for they would have perished immediately in such a place. Instead, they found arcane automata, thinking machines from old night. Thousands, possibly tens of thousands of years old, created for only two purposes: to service the machine and to defend it from intruders. And so thousands of these fire-scoured Tempest automata surged forth like a swarm of insects, looking to devour the nascent 18th. Yet whereas others would have frozen in fear, gripped by the icy fingers of terror, said ice melted when encountering the flaming souls of the Dragon Warriors. The 18th stood and fought. Yet while they lacked nothing in the way of courage and defiance, their weapons were not up to the task. These machines were crafted with unknowable technologies of old night. So potent was their armor that it had survived thousands of years submerged in pure lava, and had never once faltered. Against this, plasma and melter were sunshine upon their hide. Las cannons and missiles less than a pinprick. Bolters and autocannons proved to be less than raindrops upon the earth. The 18th was soon cut off from their transports. Unable to stop the machines, the 18th were forced to retreat deeper into the galleries. In doing so, some brave legionaries threw themselves at the automata as a doomed rearguard. Yet their sacrifice would not be in vain, for the Legion would learn that while the machines were invulnerable to their ranged weapons, intense blunt force trauma to the joints and what would pass for their heads would bring the beasts down. Fighting from gallery to gallery, the Astartes brought down the connecting tunnels, taking many automata with them. Eventually, they managed to escape the automata, and here the 18th could lick its wounds and rearm. But while 4,000 brothers had fallen, the 18th had learnt many lessons. The automata were vulnerable to melee, and could be overcome in small numbers. Surprise, however, would be essential. And so the 18th began to salvage many of the automata, forging makeshift power fists and thunderhammers. The 18th began a guerrilla war against the automata, rewiring machines to send them crashing back into vital infrastructure. Power conduits were redirected and set massive surges that fried ancient machine brains. Machine death traps were created, utilizing falling rocks or pockets of magma. Cyclopean lightning rods that conducted the power of howling electromagnetic corona were fashioned into improvised harpoon weapons to burn out the hearts of the largest machine beasts. Rivers of molten metal would be redirected into service tunnels, and automatic chambers would be compromised, detonating like miniature suns, shattering engines that had once endured for tens of thousands of Terran years. Yet soon a stalemate was reached, but while the 18th were bleeding the automata, it would be the Dragon Warriors who would lose a war of attrition. Reduced now to just 6,000 legionnaires. While the machines were wounded, eternally so, they still lived. And every day new automata were produced to replenish their losses. Thus did the 18th resolve that they had to cut the head off the snake, the ancient machine spirit that controlled all the gallery. The plan was to attack and cripple the central power transmission node. Destroying this would sever power to not only the shield generators, but also the automata. Thus a twofold attack strategy was devised. The first force would attack the central node, their sole purpose to distract the automata and draw all of them to them. Once most of the automata had been drawn, the second larger force would assault the main power node, destroying it and winning the long battle. None were expected to survive the central assault. Thus the captains of the Legion gave into the wishes of their warriors, for it would not be one singular formation that would assault the central node, not because there was fear that they would perish, but because every single one of the 18th wanted to participate in it, to be the shield for their brethren. Thus, it would be decided by lottery. When the day of the assault came, the Dragon Warriors emerged with oaths roaring and weapons bared. The central assault force, led by the Legion's remaining dreadnoughts and rapier batteries as the spearhead, surged forth to confront the automata. The Legionaries' roar of battle was met with by the howling arcana noises of the machine hordes. The fighting was intense and bloody. Machines rampant with rage were swarmed by Legionaries of the 18th and were beaten to death, while Legionaries were shattered by machine bulk or incinerated by ancient beams of eldritch light. Hundreds of Legionaries and machines lay dead. Metal claws scraped against ceramite. Spilled blood and oil were vaporized in the inhuman atmosphere, yet the 18th held and slowly advanced. and as the second force approached the main node, victory seemed within the 18th's grasp. However, the machine unveiled its final and greatest horror. As the 18th approached the power node, there was a stirring in the magma sea. Something was rising out of the fire. A vast articulated beast machine appeared, made of metal pistons, yet in the visage of an ancient kraken of old. Enrobed in armored scales of synthetic black diamond, molten metal running off its ancient hide, like it was water. Its massive coils, large enough to crush a battle titan, were more than sufficient to enwrap and shatter the silicate bridges on which the Legion fought. Their weapons less than utterly useless against this new evil, the survivors were forced to attempt a fighting retreat, though they knew it was futile. One by one, the silicon strands were severed, and hundreds more fell to their doom. The Central Force stood in abject horror as they saw the Second Force ravaged by a beast unleashed from the darkest depths. Seeing their brothers dying, and the battle seemingly lost, a part of the Central Force found a damaged colossal serrated mining drill. There the 18th managed to rewire it, and while the ancient Kraken unleashed its wrath, a massive armored ball covered in tunneling teeth was sent careening past the mighty Kraken, who could do naught but gaze upon it in abject horror, if such a monster could ever feel such a thing. As the ball smashed into the main power node, and with a vile shriek, a combination of dread, anger, and defeat, the machine thing died, as did all around it. And as the Tempest galleries fell, each machine and power generator was swallowed into lava, never to be seen again, and seemingly the 18th along with them. It had been weeks since the 18th had launched their full-on assault into the bowels of Holy Terra, and Imperial High Command believed the 18th to be dead, their folly forever etched into the core of Terra. Yet the Emperor never lost faith in his Drakes, and was quoted in saying, "They shall not fail me. They will return from the fire. Thus shall it ever be." As another day of endless waiting seemed to pass, Imperial forces felt a rumbling beneath the earth. Yells of officers and soldiers alike rang out in the camp. Some believing a tremor of the earth, others believing the enemy was trying to seize the initiative. Yet as the Imperials began to muster, the Emperor stood still, with naught but the smallest smile upon his face. As from the earth, rock and magma spewed forth, as a lone, battered and damaged termite assault drill erupted and slammed onto the earth. From it, just over 1,000 legionaries emerged, each one wounded and exhausted, their armor mud black with burn marks. It turns out that after the fall of the central node, small groups of the 18th had managed to fight to one another before linking up and reaching the termite drill, repairing it before braving the return trip. When the Emperor saw the legionaries, they were wearied and they were broken, but in their eyes, the Emperor saw something completely different. In their eyes, the gateway to their very souls, he saw defiance. Raw, righteous defiance. And in that moment, the Emperor knew what he always had known, that his Drakes would never fail him. No matter how hurt they were, no matter what type of evil they faced, they would always succeed. As the shields fell, the Imperials claimed victory, and the Emperor stood before his men with the Antok of the Caucus wastes in chains. Here, he would give the laurel of victory, the honor for the entire campaign, over to the few remaining wounded Drakes. While many Imperial army commanders were upset against this, as they all had fought, the Emperor would make it very clear. This victory, the victory over the Caucus wastes, over their foul Antok, over the ancient thinking machines and their foul automata, over the bows of the very earth itself, what the ancient tribes of Terra would have called hell, belonged to his Drakes, his dragon warriors, for it was they that had won the day, and thus it was to them that the battle honor of the Tempest galleries would be awarded. For who else could delve into hell, brave seas of lava and slay krakens and other foul monsters, but the dragons of humanity? And thus, the tale of the dragon warriors had begun. Each legion was beyond unique, for it was not only their experiences that molded and shaped them, but rather their very DNA. As what made a Space Marine was more than their training and their arms, it was their gene seed, the unique set of superhuman organs derived directly from their fathers, the Primarchs. Due to this, each legion became a small mirror of their Primarch, without ever even meeting them. Each Thousand Sun was a master of arcane arts, each Iron Hand was unyielding and methodical in equal measure, each Raven Guard was a shadow cloaked in night. And so too were the Dragon Warriors, like their Primarch, they were defiant protectors of humanity, unyielding, unbending, an unbowed shield hiding a raging wrath just beneath its surface. Yet the fire untempered will eventually burn itself out, and so too did the 18th. For whenever the 18th took to the field, they would always be fighting against the odds. While some may call such acts noble, in reality, it was unnecessary. The 18th did not take the wise action, they took the most costly action. Instead of evading, instead of redeploying, instead of acting like soldiers, warriors, they sold their lives for almost nothing, almost as if the gilded arms and armor in which they bore were worth nothing more than a mere blackened penny. The most notable example came when during a joint deployment with the 13th Legion, known then as the Warborn, against Xenos forces, the 13th suggested a tactical withdrawal to draw in the Xenos. Yet the 18th would deny this, and would deny any debate, and instead they would hold their ground, pointlessly selling their lives for no good reason. This stubbornness would result in the death of many Warborn, leading to a grudge against the 18th that would not be reconciled until the return of Vulkan. Speaking of the Drake Lord, what did become of him? Vulkan would land upon the world of Nocturne, a fire-ruined hellscape, with only 7 areas on the whole planet that could be considered safe. Themis, the city of warrior kings, Epimetheus, the Jewel City, Helicia, the Beacon City, Athonia, the Fire Spike, Clamine, the Merchant Sprawl, Sradok, the Dragon Spire. These great cities, known as sanctuary cities to the Nocturnians, were the only place that human life could survive. Yet the destination part of Vulkan would not fall into these great cities, for Vulcans would fall into the 7th and the greatest, Hesiod, the seat of tribal kings. Here, he would be taken in by a black smiter, known as Nabel. Here, Vulkan would be raised as a child of Nocturne, each man and woman of the city treating him as kin. Soon they discovered that he was much more than just a man. He mastered anything he did, and became the greatest craftsman of the city. But his time would truly come when during his 4th year, his city would be raided by creatures known to the Nocturnians as the Dusk Wraiths. Every few years they would come and steal away the people of the cities. Vulkan was urged to hide with the others, yet when he saw what turned out to be Dark Eldar reading his people, Vulkan could not stand it. Thus he would defy his father, the city, and the entire world of Nocturne by choosing to fight. He would grab 2 two-handed smithing hammers and wielded one in each hand, and he would rally his people, and together he would lead them against the Dark Eldar, with him slaying 100 of them, including their foul Archon. After this, the Dusk Race would never return to Nocturne, and upon hearing of this feat, the other 6 settlements sent envoys to Vulkan, and all of them would agree that Vulkan was the greatest amongst them, and they would declare him leader of the world. Here, Vulkan could have named himself king, but he was never the type of man to covet power or to demand fealty. So, he insisted that he would only accept the title of protector, and thus did the people name him Fireborn. After a warrior from ancient myths, an undefeatable warrior, an indomitable defender. Thus did Nocturne thrive, with each year a festival being held to celebrate the defeat of the Dark Eldar. Yet one year, a pale stranger would appear and challenge Vulkan. Many laughed at the notion, yet this pale stranger, known to the Nocturnians as the Outlander, still wished to participate. Vulkan would readily accept the challenge, and thus, the two would clash in many feats of strength, craftsmanship, and wits. Yet at each trial, the people of Nocturne would be shocked to find that the stranger matched Vulkan at every turn. After days of trial, it was realized that only one trial would settle this duel. Each had to hunt and slay the greatest dragons of Nocturne, the mighty drakes that inhabited the volcano mountains, the venerable Salamanders. He who would slay the biggest would be named victor, and thus, the two would fashion their own weapons. Vulkan, a mighty spear, and the stranger, a noble sword. So did the two set off for their shared quest. Vulkan would travel high into the mountains, where he would find a great salamander. Vulkan would challenge the creature with a salute, before engaging with it in a duel, smiting it with but a single blow, impaling its head upon his spear. Yet as Vulkan went to claim his prize, the earth of Nocturne had deemed the Fireborn's victory too easy, and so the ground beneath him gave way, and Vulkan was left dangling from a cliff, one hand grasping his prize, and the other his life. Vulkan hung there for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was only a few hours. One hand grasping upon the rock, the other upon the tail of his prize. Vulkan, however, refused to yield. How could he allow himself to be beaten by the stranger What would his people think? How could he be the Fireborn if this could happen? However, Vulkan knew that soon he would give out and eventually fall to his doom. But, unwilling to accept the outcome and unable to do anything about it, Vulkan did all he could. He defied. That was until he saw the Outlander, and slung over his back was the biggest drake Vulkan had ever seen, far bigger than his. But whilst his was a mighty prize, this was something else entirely. The Outlander, with then in a feat of strength that surprised even mighty Vulkan, hoisted up both Vulkan and his Salamander with one hand, before throwing his own Salamander into the fires, allowing them to pass over and escape the volatile mountains. The two would reach the city, and here Vulkan would be hailed as the victor, all the Nocturnians offering him praise and revelry. Yet Vulkan quieted them, and he would hand the Salamander over to the Outlander, where Vulkan would get upon one knee and declare that any man who was willing to sacrifice pride for the sake of another is a man he would gladly serve. And thus, with his life swear to the master of mankind, Vulkan would join him on his great crusade. Yet he would not be immediately reunited with his sons. But while Vulkan was a giant even amongst the demigod Primarchs, and was a renowned leader of men, when it came to matters of warcraft, Vulkan was found lacking. So did he spend many years under the tutelage of his father, the Emperor, and his brother, Primarch of the Iron Tenth, Ferrus Manus. Here Vulkan learned the ways of war, and was honed into a fine blade. Yet he was still not reunited with his sons. Instead, he was sent back to Nocturne to see its revitalization, and began recruitment of 3,000 new legionaries, the minimum amount that the Emperor decreed that a legion needed to be combat effective, known as the Alpha Induction Phase. Yet still Vulkan was not told where his sons were, and many from both Nocturne and beyond began to believe that there was a darker reason behind this separation, that the Emperor believed the current 18th would die, that the current flame was too hot, and that they were fated to burn themselves to ash, and that he wanted Vulkan to replace them with a new legion from Nocturne. The dragons of old Terra would die, and the new drakes of Nocturne would take their place. Yet tellingly, Vulkan refused such a notion outright, both that the Emperor believed this, and that he would ever let that happen. Those were his sons. Be they Terran-born or Nocturnian-born, they were his sons. His blood. And he would spill every last drop of his to save even one of their lives. And so, trusting his father and loving his sons, Vulkan waited, and waited still, until one day he would receive a message from his emperor that his sons were on Antium, and that they were dying. The 19,000 legionaries of the 18th had been battling a massive orc horde for nearly a year in the Taurus system. The orc horde had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. It surged forth into Imperial space, and would have ravaged the Imperium if not for the 18th, as they were the only force that was able to intervene. Millions of orc raiders, and their fleet of hundreds of rocks, were stalled by these few dragons. The entire system was able to evacuate, each civilian and mortal soldier able to escape. The 18th would then lead the orcs to the volcanic death world of Antium, one completely devoid of life. There the 18th had set down, building fortifications and redoubts, creating a mighty stronghold, known as the Cauldron. There they would meet the Greenskins. There, with all the wrath of hellfire and brimstone, of mighty dragons enraged by the indignity of being backed into a corner, they would fight the foul Greenskin. The 18th knew that this act would seal their fate. Here on this world, a mirror of Tartarus of old Earth, here they would die. But they would not go quietly. They would not throw themselves upon their enemy's spears. They would destroy this foe, even if it cost them their lives. They would be burned out, yes, but they would leave such a scorch mark that none would ever forget what had happened here. They fought with flame and fire, a flame and fire that was so unquenchable that none could withstand it. For they would fight against both the orc horde and the world itself, for the massive lava eruptions of Antium took no sides. Yet despite the bravery of the 18th, the tide slowly and inexorably turned against them, beginning with their Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn being mortally wounded by a massive greenskin warlord. The 18th were being pushed back, the orcs were charging from their front, and the love of the earth slowly creeping from their rear, and lo and behold the drakes of the 18th caught in between. And so it would seem that the end of the 18th had finally come, yet while the drakes of the 18th had spoken, the orcish horde had yet to hear the bellowed roar of their father. Vulkan led all 3,000 Nocturnian legionaries to Antium, and there they engaged the orc fleet, with Vulkan personally leading a boarding party onto the orc flagship. There, Vulkan would duel the leader of the Orc Horde, a massive brute so large that its sheer sides defied the very reason of human logic. Yet no matter how big this fungal abomination was, he would burn just as good, and he burned all the same, for the fireborn would smote the foul being, and lay his gargantuan ruin upon the floor of his flagship. And as his sons placed demo charges at the heart of the vessel, the Salamanders would race out of the dying craft, and where once there was a massive Orc fleet, there was now naught but less than space dust. The resulting explosion of the flagship, triggering a chain concoction of cataclysm that destroyed each Orc rock in return. From here, Vulkan and his sons would make for the planet, finding the Terran 18th launching one final assault against the Orc Horde, with Vulkan personally intervening to save 3 legionaries, who were fighting the beast that had laid low Lord Commander Vaughn, ever since known as Vaughn's Bane. Well, Vaughn's Bane meant the dragon's retribution that day, and was found woefully lacking, with Vulkan severing both his arms and impaling him with the same power claw which the Orc had used to wound Vaughn. From here, the only thing that was left was to kill the remaining greenskins, a task with which the sons of Vulkan took to with relish and passion. When all the Xenos were burnt to ruin, the Terran 18th met their father and would kneel before him. Yet here again Vulkan showed what type of man he really was. Where the last of the greenskins was a smoldering corpse, the warriors of Terra and Nocturne regarded each other, and Vulkan saw the ally he needed had been forged on the fields of Antium. Brother had encountered brother, and known they were no longer lost to each other. Numian and Orasis had captured within a few meters of Vulkan during the entire rout. Now they dropped to their knees before him. The entirety of the Terran 18th did the same. No. Rise, my sons. I am your father, not your king. We do not kneel in fealty. They looked up to him, and after hesitation, got to their feet. But Vulkan was not finished. Kneeling is an act of respect. It is a tribute that must be earned, and you have earned it. He knelt, and the Legion in its entirety murmured in awe. Your sacrifices to the people of the Taros Division will be remembered forever. You performed what was impossible, and made the sacrifice without hesitation, knowing that your task doomed you, and that it was thankless. But I give you my thanks now. He bowed his head, and after a long moment, he rose and walked through the silent, attentive ranks to a nearby Thunderhawk that had landed in the last minutes of the fight. An apothecary had transported a Medicaid bed down the ramp, and Vulkan approached the warrior who lay upon it. Vaughn was close to the end, but triumph lit his drawn face. Primarch, Vaughn rasped. Vulkan knelt beside the Lord Commander. He detached the Orc claw from his belt and presented it to Vaughn. Your enemy is dead. His weapon is now your own. I would still serve, said Vaughn. And you will, Vulkan told him, standing again. I will see you rise again, Cassian Vaughn. Your strength, the equal of your will. He turned to the combined legion. This warrior has fought to the edge of certain doom. So have all who have followed him. But we have defeated doom, and so shall we again. Behold, the 18th Legion, he announced, his voice thundering across the dead ocean. He spoke to himself as much as he did to his sons. The truth of their nature rushed over him. Did you know, Father? Did you know this moment would come? Is that why you bade me wait? So that I too would see and understand. Vulkan pointed to the east, where the eruptions and lava flows turned the horizon red. Behold the furnace! Behold the anvil of war! Behold the flames of your rebirth! Hear me, my sons! Hear your name! You are the Fireborn! You are the Salamanders! With the Salamanders reunited with their Primarch, the Legion was able to achieve its full potential. Before the Primarch, it rarely rose above 25,000 legionaries, yet with Vulkan at the helm, the Legion rose to a maximum of 90,000 Space Marines. They were still at the lower end of Space Marine legions. Each Space Marine was tempered by the fires of Nocturne, and reforged by the teachings of the Promethean Creed, a secular creed that taught 3 main primary virtues: self-reliance, self-sacrifice, and loyalty. These 3 things did Vulkan name the most important to the Salamanders, and so with his creed born of fire and steel, did he shape his sons, his legion, into the true dragons of humanity. The Salamander's infamous reputation was soon washed away with the cleansing fire of Nocturne. And while Vulkan did temper his sons and expunge their self-destructive traits, he did not dishonor his Terran veterans or try and erase them, such as in other legions, like the Death Guard or Raven Guard. Instead, he would honor them. And in his words, "I will forge an alloy strong enough to withstand any foe." And so he did. And while there are many examples, two stand out. The first is that he would handcraft a special type of dreadnought for the mortally wounded Castian Vaughn, known as the Draco's Revenant, or the Iron Dragon. This dreadnought walker is said to be the most durable sarcophagus ever created, said to be impervious to any standard Legion weapons, no matter the grade, for its metallic hide was crafted by the hands of a Primarch, meaning that only a weapon forged by another Primarch could ever harm it. This allowed the former Lord Commander to once again be the mighty Drake he once was. The second was the establishment of the Pyre Guard, an inner circle of 7 Terran-born veterans, whom Vulkan had decreed to be the best exemplars of the Promethean Creed in all of the Legion. And these warriors would form the inner circle and personal bodyguard to the Primarch, a truly immense honor, granted to those born of the Throne World, the oldest and first of Vulkan's sons. These acts, in combination with the Primarch's other reforms, centered around the 7 great settlements of Nocturne, as well as the natural willingness inherent to those of Vulkan's lineage, meant that the new 18th was forged strong. They would become renowned for being the defenders of humanity, no longer suicidal madmen longing for an unnecessary death. Now they were the anvil, upon which the foes of humanity would break, or the righteous hammer that would break them. The Salamanders were a mid-to-close-range knife-fighting force, specializing in defensive rearguards and slow grinding operations, making great use of heavy infantry such as breaches and terminators, as well as heavy armor such as Spartans, Typhoons, and super heavy battle tanks. It became known amongst all the Imperium that whenever the dragons of Vulkan would fight, no human life would be sacrificed, nor would any salamander yield in the face of the foe, for by Melter, Flamer, and Thunderhammer would they be stopped. The Salamanders quickly rose to be known as a truly reliable legion, a legion that was willing to engage in tasks that were necessary, but not always glorious. Yet the truest test for the Legion would come after the Great Crusade, when the War Master of the Imperium, the greatest son of the Emperor, and first among the Primarchs, father of the 16th Legion, the Wolves of Luna, Horus Lupercal, would fall into the grasping claws of the ruinous powers, thanks to the machinations of First Chaplain Erebus of the 17th Legion, the Word-Bearers. And in a move that threatened to shatter the very idea of Imperium, Horus would rebel against the Emperor and Holy Terra both. Yet worse still, it was not just him, but 3 other Primarchs and their legions would swear themselves to the War Master, and thus, the foul gods of chaos. Fulgrim and his 3rd Legion, those whom the Emperor called his children, Angron and his 12th Legion, those who sate their hunger with the blood of all worlds, and Mortarion and his 14th Legion, the dead men who still stood guard. 4 out of the 18 legions had turned away from the Emperor. So unbelievable was this turn of events, that when Nathaniel Garrow, commander of the Death Guard heavy frigate Eisenstein, and one of the few loyalists who managed to escape the Estevan III atrocity, but while many sons followed their fathers into the damnation of betrayal, there were those who chose loyalty over blood, and the price they paid for that loyalty was rendered in blood. So much blood. Yet when Captain Garrow told Rogaldorna what happened, the Praetorian of Terra would not even consider believing him. But, after being shown evidence of when Horus rounded up all the remembrances upon the vengeful spirit, and then revealed to them the war in Estevan III, right before massacring them all, and hearing every living soul aboard the Eisenstein give their testimony, and all the testimony being the same gruesome tale, Rogaldorn would have to accept what all logic told him, yet what could not be possible. Horus had betrayed the Emperor. Thus it was resolved by all still loyal that the traitors would be crushed with utter ruthlessness and cruelty, for family were they no more. A twofold attack strategy would sunder the traitors utterly. They thought themselves safe dug in their sniveling holes, but it would not avail them. The first wave, comprising of the majority of Ferrus Manus and his 10th Legion, the iron-handed Gorgons of Medusa, would lead Corvus Corax and his 19th Legion, those who stood guard in the Raven's shadow, and Vulkan and his 18th Legion, the Salamanders of Mount Deathfire. As these 3 legions would strike a blow most foul against the traitors, yet despite their strength, they would only be preparing for the true assault, for they would be reinforced by a second wave of loyal sons. Perturabo and his 4th Legion, the Warriors of Iron. Conrad Curze and his 8th Legion, the Sinister Lords of Black Knight. Alfarius Omegon and his 20th Legion, the Hidden Hydras of the Alpha Age. And Lorgar Aurelian and his 17th Legion, those who bear the true word. These 4 legions would combine with the 3 of the first wave, and slowly erode the stain of betrayal laid down by the wayward Warmaster. It was believed that the sheer weight and effectiveness of these 7 legions would break the traitors, annihilating them totally. The Loyalists knew on that day that for the first time in the history of the Space Marines, several legions would be massacred on a scale so grand, in a time so short, it would make the impossible seem like child's play. For Isavan V would be the site of great death, and a pivotal moment in the destiny of humanity. Oh, how right they were. Oh, how terribly right they were. War is the crucible in which we burn. In the fires of battle is the past consumed, and the future born on tongues of flame. No fire greater has there been in our times than the 3 bloody hours of the Dropsight Massacre. The traitors had set up a mighty fortress along the ridge of the Urgal Depression, a great valley that would force the Loyalists to finally to their guns. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes, countless guns, and even guard machines, led by the Monsters Diesere, readied their blades to honor the Warmaster. They would not have to wait long. And lo, the clouds vanished, and the wrathful light of divinity betrayed struck home, bathing the honorless dogs in righteous orbital blessings. Yet what would have normally rent apart entire continents only caused minor damage. The Emperor's children had made their fortress well. No great engine would tear down its walls, for each bastion would have to be taken, foot by bloody foot. And so it would be. After the barrage, thousands of drop pods and Astartes assault craft would strike at the Urgal Depression, and so, the battle for Isavan V had begun. The Salamanders would take the left, the Raven Guard would take the right, and as for the Iron Hands, Ferrus Manus, blinded by rage that his closest brother had fallen to treachery, and worse still, had the gall to believe that Ferrus was so weak that he too could be turned away from royalty. Thus the Gorgon would lead his most elite and veteran units, his Morlock Terminators, and the greatest of the Medusan clan companies, Clan Avernii, straight into the heart of the traitors, and slay Fulgrim, along with his foul legion. Thus the Gorgon and his men marched straight down the middle. To call what ensued a battle would be a lie most deceitful. In a battlefield not 20 kilometers long, approximately 500,000 Astartes, millions of mortal men and hundreds of titans, slaughtered each other for over 3 hours. The sheer level of utter brutality and destruction that was delivered in those 3 hours was enough to bring entire civilizations to heel. And I do not speak in hyperbole here, for the sheer amount of blood spilled would be enough to fill a small sea. Yet at the very end, a stalemate had been reached, for as the second wave of loyalists would arrive, Lord Manus would want to continue, the rage of the betrayal consuming his once iron constitution. Yet the level-headed advice of Corvus Corax and Vulkan would be to wait until the second wave had landed, and then crush Horus according to the plan. Yet the wrath of the Gorgon was all-consuming, and most terrible in countenance. All understanding and wisdom had now truly departed him, as he charged alone with his most elite and veteran of his legion after the traitors, whom had disengaged from combat the moment they saw the second wave arriving. As the Raven Guard and Salamanders began to filter back into the loyalist camps, they were greeted to the sight of Iron Warrior artillery and fortresses on the high grounds, Wordbearer infantry taking defensive positions along the line, Night Lord aircraft and assault troops circling in the sky above, and the mechanized forces of the Alpha Legion massing in their rear. As Voxhails went out, as the loyalists prepared to meet their kin, as the 18th and 19th Legions prepared to give glory to their fellows, as Salamander and Raven Guard removed their helms, and with arms extended and words of thanks of greeting upon their lips, they would march with their guards completely and utterly lowered. So much so that you'd wonder if they were even there to begin with. As all this happened, a single flare, colored in the most foul blood crimson, would enter the sky. It came from the traitors. And then, death came from the second wave, and found the Salamanders and Raven Guard. They had been betrayed. Iron Warrior artillery sang their grim song, and it was loud and long. Wordbearer bolters began to melt with the sheer amount of fire and reload, fire and reload, fire and reload. Night Lord aircraft unleashed savage death as nightmarish glee shrieks of raptors echoed across the battlefield, whilst the mechanized Hydra of the Alpha Legion gorged itself on the unknowing Apothecarions, supply depots and reserves. The surprise was total, the devastation even more so. Ferrus Manus was unreachable, by either Vox or foot. Passion had led him to his doom. Cut off and being surrounded by the 4 traitor legions, Vulkan wanted to dig in and regroup, gather what strength they could, and then try and fight their way out of the trap. Corvus Corax wanted to punch a hole through the traitor's flank, and begin to funnel troops towards the ships. With the lives of their sons on the line, neither would yield, so they would both go their own separate ways. Or so they would have, or after Corvus Corax nearly slew Lorgar Aurelian, who was only saved thanks to the intervention of Conrad Curze. His position would be struck by artillery, wounding him severely. As for Ferrus Manus, as his most elite sons fell at his feet, the Gorgon of Medusa would duel the Phoenician of Chemos. Yet as the battle of titans ensued, Ferrus Manus, undone by his blind rage, would be bested by Fulgrim. Yet as the Primarch struggled with what to do with him, the demon within him would kill Ferrus Manus, forever changing humanity. Thus, with Vulkan being the only Primarch left, a decision would be made. All those who were able were to make for escape, whilst those who could not, or in Vulkan's case would not, would stand as rearguard, buying them as much time as they could. Thus, Vulkan, Primarch of the 18th Legion, the Fireborn of Nocturne, the Lord of Prometheus, the Father of the Dragon Warriors, the greatest Drake of the Imperium, and the Defender of Humanity, would stand with his elite First Company, the mighty Fire Drakes, clad in monster-wrought cataphractite Terminator armor, the hides of ancient and terrible drakes cloaking their backs, ready their great hammers crackling with arcane energies, and locked their storm shields, covered in the unbreakable scale of dragons, as they planted their feet into the blood-soaked ground of betrayed earth, and bade the traitors to come and try and move them. For on that day, the metal of the Salamanders was tested, and the true character of the 18th would be known to all, and all would now know what it meant to fight the Fireborn of Nocturne. The traitors came. Wave upon wave of mad howling bastards threw themselves at the wall of dragon scale. The wall was battered. The wall was bruised. The wall lost men by the score. Yet the wall did not break. The wall did not break. Defiance, tenacity, stubbornness, whatever you wish to call it, it was the Salamanders, and the Salamanders were it. Solomus drew his knife, admiring the sharpness of the blade. "He killed Hajak, Morvik, and Erasmus," he said, counting the legionaries off one at a time on his gauntleted fingers. "All at the same time. He fought them, 3 against 1. Nevok laughed as he slammed his clip back into his bolt gun. "I seriously doubt that. The Drake was a fighter. Anyone who was Legion could see that. But all 3? He shook his head and scoffed. "Erasmus alone would have gutted him. These Drakes are warm-blooded, but they're not like us. They are weak." "You did it," said a voice from behind them. Volstar Conan made his way up the battlements by a metal stair that creaked under his armored weight. "I saw him," he added matter-of-factly, coming to stand beside the other 2 legionaries. "Then why did you not intervene?" "They had done themselves enough dishonor, without my defeat of the Drake making it worse. Besides, I hated Hajak, Morvek, and Erasmus." "You hate everyone, brother." "True," Conan said lightly, and then looked askance at Nevok. "But I reserve a special type of hatred for some, and they aren't weak. You never served in Istavan 5. You never saw them fight." Nevok looked at them both, nonplussed. "What? That was butchery, not service." Conan drew close. Nevok had his bolter by his side and fully loaded. "We had them, brother. The Ravens were abroad, guerrilla fighting even then. The Gorgon and his warriors, well, they were hell-bent on Fulgrim, but we had the Drakes. Surrounded, outnumbered, at the mercy of the high ground, and our entrenched artillery. You should have seen the Iron Warriors pummel them." He shook his head, as remembering the events he was describing in vivid detail. "Any other foe would have died, and died fast. And they did," he said, and then his voice grew low and more menacing. "But those Drakes refused to yield. They fought, even as the bombs rained down upon them, and their brethren fell in droves. Even as the Gorgon died, and the Lord of Drakes fell soon after, and when the Raven fled, they kept on and on. Some had lost limbs, others were impaled or blind, wounded beyond any reasonable capacity to function, even for a legionary. Cronan backed off, but his eyes still burned to Nebbit through his retinal lenses. I have heard it said that when you try and kill one of Guilliman's sons, you make sure he is dead. Vulkan's sons, well, they just don't die at all.
Have no fear, Vosto. I will kill any that you can't,
uttered Solomus, rising from the ammo crate. Conan glared. I respect them, Solomus, as you would do well to. The traitors would not get through this wall. Not by bolt, not by blade. Not so long as one son of Nocturne stood. The Lord of Iron, Perturabo, knew this. He knew this well. He had the measure of his brother Primarch, and his legion. Thus a snarling drake hammer smote traitor flesh, and cast their tumbling ruin down the slope. The light of nuclear fire soon made Istvan 5 glow like a flare in the darkness of night. What happened after this is not certain. It is believed that some loyalists managed to live. Their Primarch too, although wounded. The remaining of his Pyre Guard tried to evacuate him via Stormbird. A second nuclear strike would kill all remaining loyalists, and send the Stormbird hurtling towards the ground, killing all. Except for Vulkan. Here, the Drake Lord of Nocturne would rise, to find his brothers dead or missing, and his sons and nephews turned to blackened ash, with thousands of traitors surrounding him. The Primarch of the 18th resigned himself to his fate. He would die on Istvan, most likely, alongside his legion. So be it. So be it. But he would not make it easy for the traitor dogs. They would have to work hard to earn the hide of this old Drake, roaring with rage so potent, so pure that the fact that it came from a human sounded almost foolish. As the traitors charged him, he cleaved through their ranks, rage overtaking and teeth bared. Vulkan used his black smiter hands to tear apart legionaries, breaking them upon his knee like they were sticks, working them like they were molten iron in his forge, ripping out their hearts as if they were dust scrapes from many years ago now long past. The wrath of the Drakelord could not be stopped by any mortals. Sadly for Vulkan, he was not the only demigod in the field of battle, covered in wounds uncountable, beyond exhausted, and far past the point of being spent. When Conrad Curze made his move, Vulkan could do nothing. Physically smothered by Astartes like a dragon swarmed by ants, he would be knocked unconscious and taken prisoner by the Night Haunter. And with that, it was over. The pockets of Raven Guard, Iron Hands, and Salamanders, now known as the Shattered Legions, will continue to fight the traitors on Istvan for months. In truth, the battle was over, and the traitors had won. Not just won, they had achieved something that none thought possible. The Imperium of Man had been betrayed by not just 4 legions, but by 9. But Man's Red and his 1,000 remaining sons of the 15th would be forced into siding with Tzeentch after the 6th Legion, the Wolves of the Stars, and the Leman Russ had been played into sundering both forces. 9 legions now stood against the 6th of the Loyalists, with the sacrifice of Vulkan not resulting in the Loyalists escaping wounded, it resulted in allowing them to survive at all. Up to 3 legions, the Raven Guard managed to retreat the most intact, losing approximately 94% of their strength. The Salamanders were next, losing approximately 98% of their strength. And finally the Iron Hands, with less than 1% of their forces making it off-world. But it is important to note, the figures that I have just stated represent the Legion strength on-world. In regards to the total strength left after the battle, the Iron Hands had about 1/3 of their forces off-world, as Ferrus Mans had raced to fight the traitors. The Raven Guard were reduced to about 1/10 of their strength, and the Salamanders about 5 to 6%. But it is important to note that all these forces were scattered to the winds in various warbands, meaning that effectively, the 10th, 18th, and 19th Legions did not exist. At least, as tactical units in any meaningful way. Combine that with the fact that the Ultramarines, Space Wolves, and Blood Angels were all savaged on Calth, Prospero, and Cygnus respectively, meant that the Loyalists were now outnumbered by the traitors, and very much so on the back foot. And so, the Salamanders were undone, their legion scattered to the 4 winds of the galaxy, and their father missing, most likely dead. Witnessing the death of their father, the Iron Hands would fall farther than any other Royalist legion, becoming hollow shells of their former selves. Yet this fate would not befall the Salamanders, for while the Iron Hands accepted that Manus was dead, no Salamander would ever accept that Vulkan was dead. No. For them and for every son of Nocturne, Vulkan was alive. He was alive. For the Primarch of the 18th lived. He lived! Vulkan lives! After the massacre of Loyalists on Isavan V, Vulkan was taken prisoner by Conrad Curze, the Primarch of the 8th Legion. He'd always struggled with himself. The Night Haunter, a macabre mockery of justice and violence, and Conrad Curze, the man who was supposed to be a demigod of justice. But by the time of the Dropsight Massacre, he had well and truly gone mad. Vulkan and Conrad had always been at odds with one another. No two legions were more diametrically opposed to one another in temperament, morals, core values, and fighting style. Whenever the two legions fought beside one another, it gave them another reason to hate each other. Instead of extrapolating for a time, the relationship between the two legions can be summed up as follows. The Salamanders prided themselves on protecting the weak. The Night Lords prided themselves on preying on the weak. Yet there was another reason as to why the hatred of Conrad burned so bright. Vulkan was a kind soul, loved by his legion, and his legion loved him. He and his legion were not just everything Conrad and his legion weren't. Deep down, Conrad wanted to be good. But he had fooled himself into believing that he had no choice in doing what he did. He had to do it. It was his destiny. And if he could break the unbreakable, if Vulkan could fall, then he was right. Or so the madness of the Night Haunter reasoned in folly. Thus did Conrad torture Vulkan. Again and again with a mixture of malice and madness did the Night Haunter carve the Lord of Drakes, before finally killing him. Or so he thought. For it was revealed that Vulkan, like his father, was a perpetual, a nigh immortal being. What would normally be a boon for most became a curse for the Primarch of the 18th. Curze would take this as insult and challenge both, and redouble his efforts to break Vulkan. He would decapitate him multiple times. He would rip out his throat with a piece of cutlery. He would stab him through the chest, and he would virtually tear him limb from limb with his own wicked claws. Curze would have him eviscerated, shot at close range by hundreds of bolters, put into a ventilation shaft of the starship's engines, and even stripped naked and thrown out of an airlock into the airless void of space. He would have Vulkan to pull against chains to prevent a ceiling in another cell from crushing its innocent occupants. He would have him be starved at the banquet table with other mortal prisoners alongside him, watching the food decay and the prisoners wither away. He would entrap him in battle plate that he was unable to control, and force him to hunt down captured soldiers and other royalist Astartes. He would even conjure a psychic illusion, in which Vulkan had to fight his brother Corvus Corax after a failed fictional rescue attempt. Yet despite it all, Vulkan would not yield. The Night Haunter could not break the Fireborn, so in a moment of desperation, he came to one final conclusion. He would duel him to death. He would unleash Vulkan into a labyrinthine maze, a nightmarish trap of false paths, markless roads, and lore-defying illusions of mind-breaking proportions. Designed by the Primarch Perturabo, known as the Cava Ferrum, or the Iron Hole, this was a trap unlike any other. For at the center of the maze, Curze placed Vulkan's hammer, Dawnbringer. As Vulkan tried to navigate the maze, Curze would leap from the shadows, toying with him. From maiming him to outright killing him, Vulkan was pushed to his very edge, and it seemed that the metal of the dragon was about to crack. But then, at that very moment, the Emperor would appear before Vulkan in the guise of a remembrancer, and during that psychic vision, he would remind Vulkan of his inner strength, his true strength, the strength that only a dragon possesses, and that he was watching him, not just him, but all his sons. Vulkan would then rise, the fire of the hearth furnace reignited and blazing ferociously, and he would yell out to the Night Haunter, "These fear tactics might work on mortals, but I am a Primarch Conrad," I declared, grateful to my father for gifting me these last moments of lucidity. I would need them to fight my brother now. One worthy of the name.
Do you think me unworthy, do you, Vulkan?
His voice came from behind me, but I knew it to be a trick, and resisted the temptation to face it. It does not matter what I think, Conrad. Know what the rest of us thinks. You behold your reflection, brother. Is that not what you see?
You won't goad me, Vulkan. We've come too far, you and I, for that.
Did you think there'd be no mirrors in the darkness? Nothing to reflect your worthless self? Is that why you cower there, Conrad? I began to turn, sensing my brother's closeness. if not his actual presence. He was gifted, despite my taunt suggesting to the contrary. Not so unlike Corvus, though his methodology was far removed from that of the Raven Lord.
Do you seek me, Vulkan? Do you wish to have your chance again, like you did at Kartan?
Why would I want that? You are beneath me, Conrad. In every way. You always have been. The Lord of Fear has no land. No subjects but the corpses he makes. You are nothing. You are nothing.
I am Night Hunter!
At last, Curze gave in to his self-hatred, his pathological denial, and revealed himself to me. One of the statues hanging down from an archway, a Chiroptean creature I had mistook to be a craven gargoyle, slowly unfurled its wings and dropped to the ground. It was him, and he brandished a long serrated blade.
We are both such savage weapons, Vulkan. Let me show you!
Curze lunged, laughing.
Never gets old,
he said, arcing into my body and carving a deep wound. I cried out, but kept my senses long enough to hammer a punch into its neck. Even his armor was no protection against my black smiter's fists. I had bent metal, grasped burning coals. I was as inviolable as the hard onyx of my skin, and I let my brother feel every ounce of that strength. He staggered, slashing wildly and catching me just above the left eye as I advanced. A jabbed aim for his exposed throat, missed, and fractured Curze's right cheek instead. In return, he skewered my left leg, ripping out the blade and some flesh before I could trap it. I stumbled, and Curze wove round my clumsy right hook to bring his sword down into my clavicle. I threw up my forearm just in time and felt the weapon's teeth bite bone. I then charged in with my shoulder, trying to ignore the agony igniting down my arm. I heard him grunt as my body connected, smashing into the torso. Curze tried to laugh it off, but his fractured cheek was paining him, and I just punched most of the air out of his lungs. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Ferris Manus watching the uneven duel. He was no longer the cadaverous ghoul I had made him to be. The Gorgon became as he was, as I wanted to remember him, no longer berating me. I sensed in him a willing urge for me to triumph instead. Let me tell you a secret, brother, I said, breathless. We were but a few handspans apart, battered and regrouping for another round. Amused, Curze bade me continue. Of us all, Father made me the strongest. Physically, I have no equal amongst my siblings. In the sparring cages, I used to hold back, especially against you, Conrad. All the mirth drained away from Curze's already pallid face.
I am Night Hunter!
He hissed. In the sparring cages, I used to hold back. What was your boon, Conrad? I asked, backing up as he advanced with his sword held low.
I am the death that haunts the darkness,
he said, angling the blade so that it would cut across my stomach and spill out my viscera. Always the weakest, Conrad. I was afraid, I admit that. But it was from the fear of breaking you. I don't need to hold back anymore, though, I said, smiling in the face of my brother's rising hatred. Now I can show you how much better than you I am. Possessed by a sudden rage, Curze threw down the blade and came at me with his bare hands. I knew it was coming, and had shifted my stance just so slightly that I was ready for it. I let him land the first blow. It was vicious, and tore a chunk of my flesh off my cheek. He reached for my throat, talons poised to rip it out, teeth bared in a savage snarl. Before I clamped my fist around his forearm, pulling back and using his momentum to carry him up and over me. In the forge, the hammer swing is everything. Shaping metal, bending it to my will. It is the blacksmith's art. By its nature, metal is unyielding. It breaks stone, sunders flesh. Strength is not enough. It takes skill and timing, judgment of when the hammer has reached its apex, and when the strike is purest. That is what I knew. It was ingrained in me by my Nocturnian father, Meulen. I used this lesson in that moment, and lifted my brother like a smiter lifts the fuller, and brought him down upon the iron plinth, my anvil. A sharp crack and a light surge that painted the chamber in bluish monochrome preceded the collapse of the energy shield. Curze broke it with his back, his body and as he rebounded hard off the iron floor, the energy coursing over him, setting fire to his nerve endings and burning scalp and hair, he rolled over with the last of his momentum, smoke exuding from the plates of his armor. I stooped and picked up the fallen hammer. It felt good to have Dawnbringer in my grasp again, and I ran my thumb along the activation stud that I had put on the grip. "You should not have led me here, Conrad," I told him. My brother was still curled up and shaking from the energy spikes of the shield. At first I thought he was sobbing, his shame and self-loathing having reduced my poor brother to melancholy again. But I was wrong. Curze was laughing once more.
"I know, Vulkan,"
he said, having recovered some of his composure.
"Your beacon won't work. This chamber is teleport shielded. Nothing goes in or out except through that gate behind you."
Still trembling with the aftershocks of absorbing the energy shield, Curze managed to stand.
"Did you think you had broken me, brother? Did you believe you had tricked me into letting you escape?"
He grinned.
"Hope is cruel, isn't it? And yours was false, Vulkan."
Before I could prevent it, he twisted something on his vambrace, activating some system slave to his armor. Hearing the churn of gears, I braced myself. I expected another death trap, a long plunge into a still deeper dungeon. Instead, I saw the floor retreat, leaving a sturdy mesh that supported our weight, and that I could see through. There was another chamber below the heart of the labyrinth, but it was nothing more than a dark cell. No, not a cell. A tomb. Weak lumen strips flickered in this hidden undercroft, and their combined light and shadow revealed hundreds of bodies. Humans and legionaries, prisoners of the Prince of Crows. They languished in the gloom. They were dead, but before they had died, they had been tortured and brutalized.
"This is my true work of art,"
Curze revealed, gesturing to the slain as I packed wood his finished canvas.
"And you, Vulkan, the immortal king, presiding over the anguished dead, are my crowning piece."
"You're a monster," I breathed, eyes wide with the horror of it.
"Tell me something I don't know,"
he hissed, meeting his madman's gaze. I decided to oblige him. "You're right," I considered, holding up Dawnbringer so I could see it. "I fashioned it as a teleporter, a means to escape a prison even such as this. I counted on you leading me here, on you needing to face me. One last time. It seems I was fooled into thinking you hadn't planned for this." I lowered the weapon, and let the weight of its head pull the haft down, until my hand was wrapped around the very end of the grip. "But you are forgetting one thing." Curze leaned in, as if eager to hear my words. He believed that he had me, that I would never escape this trap. He was wrong.
"And what's that, brother?"
"It is also a hammer." The blow caught him across the chin, a savage upswing that took Curze off his feet and put him on the ground again with the sheer force of impact. He got to one knee before I hit him again, this time his left shoulder blade where I split his potion in half. I jabbed into his stomach before swinging a second blow that put him on his feet again. Curze almost fell again when I drove into him, pressing the hammer's haft against his throat and pushing him back until he slammed up against the wall. His gorget had broken and was hanging loose, so I kept the haft across his trachea and pushed it again, one hand on the pommel and the other on the hammerhead, slowly beginning to crush bone. Blood and saliva flecked Curze's armor, spat from his still grinning mouth.
"Yes,"
he choked at me.
"Yes."
So wretched. I wanted to kill him, to end his suffering and take some measure of vengeance for all the suffering he had caused me and my sons.
"Come on."
Curze's eyes were pleading, and I realized he wanted this. Ever since Katran, he had wanted this. Not every Chinka witness I had seen in this place was feigned. Curze truly did loathe himself, so much so that he wanted it to end. If I killed him, he would have everything he wanted. Death, and a means of bringing me down to his despicable level.
"I am damned, Vulkan. End it now."
The abyss was pulsing at the edge of thought. Black and red, the monster crawling up from its depths to claim me. So many dead. I could almost hear their corpses willing me to do it, to avenge them. And then I saw Ferris, his proud and noble face looking down upon me, the beloved older brother.
Do it. I will only kill again. Take another for my amusement. Korax, Dawn, Gilliman. Perhaps I'll break the lion when we reach Thramas. You can't risk letting me live.
I released him. He fell clutching his throat, choking at the air back into his lungs. From beneath the long strands of hair, he glared at me, eyes filled with murderous intent. I scorned him. Worst of all, I had let him live when I had every reason not to, and proved that he was alone in his depravity.
You cannot escape. I'll never let you go.
I looked down at him, pitying. You are wrong about that too. No craft you possess can hold me here now, Conrad. I brandished the hammer and held it aloft like it was my standard. Your dampeners are useless. I could have left the room as soon as I took the hammer from the cage, but I chose to stay behind. I wanted to hurt you, but most of all, I wanted you to know I could spare you. We are alike, Conrad, but not like that. Never like that. But if I see you again, I will kill you. I spoke these last words through clenched teeth, my sanity hanging by the barest thread, as the grace Varas had given to me finally faded. Or perhaps it was my own resolve that had preserved my mind. One last Herculean effort to stave off the madness. I would never know. Pressing the stud upon Dawnbringer's haft, I closed my eyes and let the flare of teleportation take me. Yet as Vulkan escaped the grasp of Curze, he would be transported into the atmosphere of the homeworld of the Ultramarines, Macragge. Here, as Vulkan's very bones were charred hell black, he took comfort in the fact that he was whole, and in the care of his nephews, the Ultramarines. These would be the last sane thoughts that Vulkan would have for some time, as when he regenerated from his death, the sheer pain and distortion of the unstable teleportation was the straw that finally broke the camel's back, and Vulkan's mind would shatter, driving him into a state of semi-madness. For as Vulkan's body would regenerate, the Primarch would be revived, much to the horror and awe of the Ultramarine apothecaries, who were still trying to identify his body. Rabute Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, was summoned immediately. Yet much to the annoyance of the first consul, none could explain to him how Vulkan had gotten to Ultramar, let alone how he was even alive. Yet Gilliman would soon discover that while Vulkan was alive, he was far from sane. The Lord of Drakes was driven mad by rage, attacking almost everything he saw. That was until the arrival of the Dark Angels, under their Primarch, the Firstborn, Lionel Johnson. Yet while the uncrowned princes were the only legion to arrive, their ships carried more than one Primarch. As it turns out that Conrad Curze had soared aboard the Lion's flagship, causing untold chaos about the Gloriana class. Yet when the atmosphere above Macragge, it was still a drop pod and escaped to the planet's surface. This would cause discord amongst all the Primarchs, with Gilliman and Sanguinius trying to rein in the Lion, whom, driven by a need to sate honor, vengeance, and duty, was willing to deploy nuclear munitions on Macragge's surface, just to kill Curze. As for Vulkan, he seemingly had some type of bond with Curze, with him being able to track the Night Haunter. He would break free of his bonds and raid Gilliman's personal armory for arms and armor, before tracking down and dueling the Night Haunter, saving the adoptive mother of Gilliman, Tasha Euretha, in the process. The two will duel across the capital city of Macragge, Curze being able to use his precognition and precise ability to deal savage blows, Vulkan being able to endure any blow, no matter how critical, and fueled by a terrible, unnatural rage. The duel would seemingly be at a standstill, with Vulkan destined to be the victor, via sheer attrition, as he simply could not die. It would be at this critical point that John Grammaticus would appear. The immortal Perpetual had been tasked with the mysterious cabal, with slaying the Primarch of the 18th Legion for their own Byzantine machinations. Originally, he was meant to give Curze a weapon, Fulgurite, a petrified bolt of psychic lightning, said to be from a battle with the Emperor and the ruinous powers. In that critical moment, Eldrad Uthwan, the chief Farseer of Craftworld Uthway, and greatest psyker of that hallowed race, would tell Grammaticus that if he stabbed Vulkan himself, he would restore Vulkan's mind, and allow Vulkan to come to the aid of the Emperor on Terra, balancing the scales between the two forces, but at the cost of his own immortality. Grammaticus ultimately would choose the latter option, and stab the Primarch in the heart, causing the Fulgurite to explode, killing them both. Yet while John Grammaticus would revive for the final time, Vulkan's body would remain still. His brother Primarchs would find his body and reverently place it within a stasis capsule, known as the Unbound Flame, hand-rocked by the Primarch of the 13th himself, in the gilded marble halls of Macragge, where Vulkan's body lay, until First Captain Artemis Numion would arrive, having been rescued from a Wordbearer's torture ship by an Ultramarine strike force, led by Aeonid Thiel, known as the Red Marked, would be brought to Imperium Secundus, where he would find the other Salamanders who had gathered there. Yet the fire that burnt with the passion of dragon blood was missing from their eyes, for the indomitable spirit that had been the Salamanders had finally broken. For all before the First Captain had seen the still body of the Lord of Drakes, scales soft and fire extinguished. Many Salamanders lamented that such a mighty Drake lay still in cold marble of gilded halls, whereas he should be submerged within the warm tender bosom of Mother Earth. Yet when Numion demanded to see the body, to the shock of all present, the Primarch's body was missing. The entire city was searched by marine and mortal alike, yet no search bared fruit. However, Numion would find the Primarch's body, resting peacefully in his statutory garden. None could explain how Vulkan's body had arrived there. The Primarch Gilman reasoned that it was a result of Dawnbringer's teleportation mechanism malfunctioning. Yet to many Salamanders, this was a sign that their spirits should not be so easily extinguished, that their Primarch was not dead. For Numion, however, this was never a question. He alone amongst the Salamanders never once questioned if their Primarch still lived. For him, every day was just like the first, when he uttered those words. Vulkan lives! And so did the Salamanders make the difficult decision. They would brave the ruined storm and take their Primarch home to Nocturne. These 67 brave sons of Vulkan, led by Artemis Numion, would name themselves the Pyre and vow to see their Primarch home. They were met with opposition from every side, including the Primarch Rebute Gilliman, yet the Pyre would not be dissuaded. The fire of the 18th burned bright, and none could withstand it. Sanguinius, Primarch of the 9th Legion, with divine wisdom befitting his angelic countenance, would be the first to offer his blessing. The Lion, protector of the realm, would be next, understanding that expending resources to keep the Pyre here would be unnecessary and wasteful in the extreme. And finally, the Lord of Ultramar, after much convincing from his brother Primarchs, Artemis Numion and his own inner circle, would finally relent. And thus, Vulkan's casket would be loaded onto the Pyre's flagship, the battle barge Charybdis. And so it was that the Pyre of Vulkan made the way to Nocturne, their home, and their destiny. The journey to Nocturne was an odyssey of cataclysmic proportions. The Pyre was beset by the roiling tides of the Immaterium, countless space dangers, and of course, the direct intervention of traitor forces. Or to those loyal to the War Master, the very possibility of Vulkan's resurrection was too much to bear. Thus did the void assets from both the Word Bearers and Death Guard hound the Pyre all the way to Nocturne. Were surrounded on all sides by traitors, the Charybdis would place herself in the direct line of fire from the traitor guns, allowing the remaining of the Pyre, a band of 20 led by Numion, to escape with Vulkan's casket to the surface of Nocturne, where they would be pursued by the Death Guard, who would seek to kill the Pyre and claim Vulkan's body before invading Nocturne. The Death Guard flyers would shoot down the Thunderhawk, causing it to crash, but the surviving Pyre were able to rally and defend Vulkan's casket. Yet these were not the only survivors of the 18th, as Nocturne was garrisoned by 700 legionaries, led by Lord Chaplain Numius Right-Hand, who upon learning of the Pyre's plight, he would sally out to aid his beleaguered brethren. The Lord Chaplain would rescue the remaining Pyre and transport them and Vulkan's casket to the fortress bastion, known as the Draconic Gate. If the sons of Mortarion, true to their nature, would not yield. Thus did hundreds of Death Guard try to conquer the land of dragons. In typical Death Guard fashion, they tried to envelop Nocturne in death by virus bombing the planet. Yet the sheer fire of the world, in combination with the shielding and atmospheric fire scrubbers deployed by the Salamanders, meant that the Exterminator's great weapons had no effect on the world. And after 20 minutes of constant bombardment, the Death Guard would launch a ground assault, and this would be the last of their mistakes. The earth of Nocturne would swallow whole armor companies, magma flows would claim legionary columns, and the great dragons of Nocturne, roused from slumber by the fell bombardment, would greedily glut themselves of Babrisian flesh. And all of this was before the Death Guard reached the walls of the vengeful Salamanders. Most of the Death Guard died that day. A few would escape off-world via the Grand Cruiser, yet they too would meet their end in the stars above the fires of Nocturne, as every traitor who stepped foot upon Nocturne had met a grisly charred end. After this, the 700 remaining Salamanders would gather and stand vigil, as they prepared for the final rites of their Primarch, and prepared for his return. For they would lower Vulkan's body into the flames of Mount Deathfire, where it was expected that he would emerge healed and whole. Yet as the fires claimed him, all that rose was smoke and ash. Many believed that this was the end, that Vulkan rising meant the Legion, that while the Primarch's body had fallen, his spirit lived, for his spirit was the Legion. And with this, the Legion would rise from the ashes and continue to fight, as they had always done before, as their father had always taught them to do. All but one. Archelaus Numion, the most faithful of the Legion, refused to believe that Vulkan was dead, in any sense of the word. So after a week of waiting, a broken Numion would remember the famous words of Magnus the Red, for during the Pyre's journey to Nocturne, the group had been saved by a shard of the Crimson King. He would ask the first captain of the Salamanders how much was he willing to sacrifice to see Vulkan restored. And so, Numion would give everything. He would strip down to his sash, and he would climb the great mount of Nocturne. There at its height, he would enter into the core of the mountain and give itself unto its magma heart, not with a cry upon his lips, but with a wish in his heart. Not just a wish, a statement, one of rage, hope, denial, sorrow, power, and defiance. Vulkan lives! After some time, 3 legionaries, Atokambidi, Barakzaitos, and Igangaro, would seek their wayward leader. At the base of Mount Deathfire, they would find a figure walking in the dust. Believing it to be their first captain, they went to retrieve him. Yet when they got closer, they would see the truth, and said truth would cause them to fall to their knees in awe and thanks. For before them was not their first captain. Nay, Archelaus Numion was now one with the great fire of Nocturne. Yet the one who stood before them was here on this very earth with them, and they could not believe it. For Vulkan lived. After the resurrection of Vulkan, he bade the 3 legionaries who found him to swear oaths of secrecy. The Primarch at the 18th wished none of his sons to know of his resurrection. Why this is unknown, but it is believed that Vulkan did not want to disturb his son's newfound closure, or that he did not want them to follow him into the jaws of hell. For after discussing the matter with Eldred Ulthuan, he would be convinced that he would need to travel to Terra to stand by the Emperor, taking only the 3 legionaries who found him, now dubbed as the Draxward. The 4 would travel to the throne world via the webway, by the aid of the Eldari, and using the Talisman of 7 Hammers. The journey would be fraught with peril. Vulkan would have many misadventures, involving demons, terrors of the Dark Age, Dark Eldar, and the Shattered Legions. Yet these events will be recalled when discussing the Lord of Drakes. Eventually, Vulkan would reach Terra, and here he would meet his father upon the Golden Throne. Word was said that something terrible was revealed to the Primarch, that should Terra fall, it would be his duty to trigger the Talisman of 7 Hammers, and destroy the world, along with all those present. Vulkan was horrified by the very thought. Not just that he had something to do with this caliber of murder, but that he was able to forge such a device. Here the Emperor would reveal that this was his purpose all along, but because he was so hesitant and repulsed by such devices, it was he alone that could be trusted with them. Vulkan was left uneasy by this, but nevertheless resolved to do his duty. He would take his place at Eternity Gate, standing in front of the throne room, being the personal life ward to the Emperor, though his participation was kept as a secret to most within the army. Here, Vulkan would stop all who would assault the Emperor, including his brother Magnus the Red. After no reconciliation could be reached, the Lord of Drakes and the Crimson King would engage in a titanic battle, which saw Magnus fully give over to the ruinous powers and flee into the webway to perform a ritual to sap the power from the Emperor. Vulkan would enter the webway to end the madness of the Lord of Prospero. The battle that was fought there was something beyond understanding. Unimaginable psychic might met the impossible implacability. Magnus was strong, but Vulkan was unyielding. The Crimson King was running out of options. He was getting desperate. So he tried to invade Vulkan's mind, yet the Fireborn would not be tricked. His brother was gone. All that was left was chaos. So with a mighty roar, Vulkan threw the Red Fiend from his mind, and upon the floor of the ancient architecture that the Crimson King lay, with Vulkan, hammer in hand, towering over him, ready to strike him down. Yet compassion gripped his heart and stayed his hand. For Vulkan mourned not what was before him, but rather the brother whom he loved, and whom he had lost. In this moment, Magnus cast one final spell, attempting to unravel Vulkan's very DNA. The Drake Lord, with a howl of rage, slammed his hammer into the head of Magnus, banishing him back to the warp. Vulkan would enter real space, slowly but surely recovering from the vicious attack. When he returned, he learned of the Emperor's assault on the vengeful spirit. Yet as always, it was Vulkan's duty to stand guard, now over the slowly dying Sigillite, and if need be, destroy the heart of mankind. Yet, this never came to pass. As Malcador's life would end, Vulkan would still stand guard. As the Emperor's body was interred upon the Golden Throne, Vulkan would still stand guard. As the scouring took place, Vulkan would still stand guard. As the Primarchs debated the Codex and the futures of the Legions, Vulkan would still stand guard. As the Imperium mourned the loss of what was, Vulkan would still stand guard. As the Imperium began to change into what it is, Vulkan would still stand guard. As his brothers disappeared one by one, Vulkan would still stand guard. Even when none knew where he was, Vulkan would still stand guard. Even as the beast tried to conquer Terra, Vulkan would still stand guard. Even as he led the counterattack to destroy this monster, Vulkan would still stand guard. Even as he stood alone, crushing all who came before him, and as he wrenched the foul beast free from his blighted feet, and sent them both hurtling into an unstable reactor of unknown providence, Vulkan would still stand guard. And now, even as his sons searched for his 7 remaining artifacts, believing that if they were found, the Father would return for them in the most dire of hours, Vulkan still stands guard. And so shall he ever, and so shall his sons. For just as the Master of Dragons was a life war for the Master of Mankind, so too are dragons, the life wars of humanity, and they still stand guard. While the bulk of the Salamanders were involved with the actions of their Primarch, not every son of Nocturne was able to stand with the Fireborn. As after the Dropsight Massacre at Istavan 5, the soldiers of the 18th were cast every which way. There are countless tales of small bands of Salamanders fighting and dying during the Heresy. From the small bands found in the various groups of the Shattered Legions, to the story of the Ebon Drake, led by the twice dead, the Avatar of the Sacred Flame, the former Legion Master of the 18th, Cassian Vaughn. But the one that I wish to elucidate is the story of oaths left undone, of sins unanswered, of those left unscarred, and how despite it all, the Salamander's defiance would carry through the ages. This is the story of the artifacts of Vulkan. The impossible had become reality. Horus Lupercal had turned from the Emperor, and the Imperium was now plunged into civil war. Such a fact sent shivers of dread and horror upon all those who knew. But these feelings were even worse amongst those who truly understood what it meant, and what it could become. Vulkan was one of those few. As he prepared to depart from Nocturne, to end the rebellion before it began, he was faced with a difficult decision. In the 200 years of the Great Crusade, the Lord of Drakes had crafted many a weapon, of both beautiful countenance and terrifying power. Not only had Vulkan been taught the craft of the smith, it was something that was built into his very genes. Yet Vulkan never once considered that these weapons would be turned against the Imperium. Thus did he resolve to safeguard humanity by removing the threat altogether. It would destroy all the artifacts stored on Nocturne. Yet, when this was revealed to his most senior Forge Master of the 18th and confidant of Vulkan, Kel, the Czech Marine would passionately beg his father to spare some of them, reasoning that while they could be used against humanity, they could also do so much good for humanity, that it was not their destructive power that made them valuable, but rather their sheer mastery and beauty of their craft. That was their true value. After such a passionate and sincere argument, even the mighty Drakelord would yield. He would allow Kel to choose 7 artifacts that he would guard as their ward. The rest would burn. And so it was that as the Fireborn left the newly christened Forgefather, it would be the last time that Kel would see his father, for word would reach Prometheus about the Dropsight Massacre, and the then unknown fate of their Primarch. Kel knew his duty, but he would need help to see his oath fulfilled. A company of 50 Firedrakes were left as garrison on Prometheus, yet upon hearing what had happened to their legion, a sense of shame would grip these Space Marines. This would lead them to dub themselves as the Unscarred, led by Captain Raz Obek, known as the Firebearer. Kel would reveal to them Vulkan's final order to him, that if he fell at Istavan, to destroy his relics, and take the remaining 7 to the Rot, a weapons cache made by the Primarch himself. Thus did the Unscarred accept this task. They would see the Forgefather through his journey, or die trying. And as the relics of Vulkan were destroyed in cleansing flame, the Salamanders would board the first relic, which Kel had saved, the Chalice of Fire, a massive forge ship which would house the other 6 relics: the Engine of Woes, the Eye of Vulkan, the Obsidian Chariot, the Song of Entropy, the Spear of Vulkan, and the Unbound Flame. From here, the Salamanders would try and find the Rot, as they did not know the exact location of the cache, as it was hidden to keep it away from prying eyes. but eventually the Salamanders would be led to an unnamed planet in the Boron 13 system. Yet as the Salamanders cautiously explored the surface, they would find that they were not the first to lay foot upon this world. As it turned out, the traitor forces composing of Sons of Horus, led by Vostok Conan, and Dark Mechanicum Tagmata, led by heretic tech priest Adept Regulus, emissary to Horus Lupercal, who had learned about the existence of the rot, and thus the War Master had demanded that Vulkan's artifacts be taken for the traitor's cause. The Salamanders would learn of this, and resolve to safeguard their father's works, or die trying. They would launch an initial assault of the traitor camp around the rot, and though they would slay many traitors, Forgefather Tekel would be stunned by unknown means, forcing Captain Olbeck to defend them against 3 Sons of Horus, veteran Blade Master Legionnaires, with the Firebearer slaying them all, but left wounded. He would then act as a rearguard, as the rest of the Salamanders fell back, safeguarding the still unconscious Forgefather. As the Salamanders were discussing their next course of action, Tekel would regain consciousness and reveal that Olbeck was still alive. Thus, the Salamanders decided that they would rescue their captain and lock themselves within the rot. The Salamanders' assault was full of wrath and fury, engulfing the underground tunnels with scouring flame. They would find their captain being tortured by Regulus and Reiko Solamus, a psychotic torturer from the Sons of Horus. Yet despite this, Solamus failed to get anything from the Firebearer. With their captain rescued, the remaining Salamanders would find themselves in front of the rot, which the traitors had been unable to open, as it required the DNA of either Vulkan or Tekel. As the door opened, the Salamanders would rush into the rot, as the traitors could do nothing but curse, as these doors were handcrafted by the Primarch of the 18th himself, and nothing the traitor's hand could breach it. Yet as the Salamanders readied themselves, they would meet a tech priest, supposedly left by Vulkan to maintain the vault. Yet as it spoke, it was the voice of Regulus. As it turned out, he had infected not just this tech priest, but also Forgefather Tekel. As the doors of the rot opened, Tekel, in an effort to spare his brothers from further betrayal, would wrestle his left arm away from Regulus, before overcharging his plasma pistol and removing half of his face. From there, the Salamanders would engage the approaching Sons of Horus in a last moment of defiance. Yet the unscarred would be saved by a force of shattered legion, led by Iron Father Kasigon Ulok, causing the traitors to flee in panic. As Ulok and Olbeck entered into discussion, Ulok would convince Olbeck to share the contents of the rot and help them with their attempt to kill the War Master himself. But importantly, Olbeck would keep the knowledge of the relics of Vulkan hidden. The two forces would engage in a boarding action against the remaining traitors to kill Regulus and Vostok Conan, the former having some history with Ulok. Yet as the Salamander Terminators breached the ship, they would notice that the Iron Hand's breaches which accompanied them were more than reserved. They acted more like automata than legionnaires. And after the traitors had all been destroyed, all secrets would be revealed, as Ulok discovered the artifacts of Vulkan and demanded them to help him with his wayward assassination attempt. Olbeck would refuse, and he would also discover the sin Ulok had committed, as he had unleashed the Keys of Hell, a device which Ferrus Manus had wanted destroyed, as it allowed dead legionaries to be revived. Yet these revenants, as they were known, were little more than flesh puppets. From here, some of the Salamanders would be imprisoned, while Ulok prepared to lead an assault on the Chalice of Fire. Yet the Salamanders would find allies from those within Ulok's warband, who shared their disgust at the actions of the Iron Father. Forgefather Tekel, having barely survived his wounds thanks to his cybernetics, would join Azoth, a Medusan immortal, the elite breachers of the Iron Tenth, and Saurian, an apothecary of the Salamanders. As Sauron would lead the Salamanders to the shuttle, Azoth would guard Tekel as he destroyed the vile machine. In the end, Tekel would destroy the Keys of Hell, along with the battle barge, by ordering the Eye of Vulkan, a weapon of grave power, to fire upon the ship while he was still inside, sacrificing his life in the process. The rest of the Salamanders would repel the borders and escape the system, yet with a reduced number and damaged ship, there was nothing they could do. Yet as the Chalice of Fire lost power and their engines died, the remaining warriors of the 18th, unscarred no longer, would continue their duty and stand as ward over the 7 artifacts of Vulkan, no matter what would happen or whom would come. The squad moved slowly through the silent ship, their armor sealed against the vacuum, and the slow return of their reed breathers audible in their helms. Brother Sergeant Coltan had been dispatched when the Adeptus Mechanicus Explorators had found the stricken vessel, drifting amidst the debris field of other broken starships. A degrading gravity well exerted by one of the moons on the fringe, too weak to draw ships in, but strong enough to hold them in a state there for a while. And upon discovering the vessel's provenance, the Magos in charge of the mission had immediately sent a message to Prometheus. Coltan and his brothers had arrived a few weeks later, translating out of the warp at the nearest Mandival point, and reaching the debris field in a few days after that. Evidence a prior incursion, Vasca's voice hissed with static as it came across the feed. A beacon signature, faint but readable, was emitting from somewhere deeper than the ship. "I have designated corpses here," answered Khotan as he entered the barrack hall. The tread of his Terminator armor strangely light in the zero-gravity conditions as he briefly released the madlock, securing him to the deck. "Origins? Xenos, Eldar, and Greenskin. Ginsilla? Negative. Be wary, brother. This is their habitat." Khotan sent an affirmative and moved on. He passed through another corridor, partly laid open to the void. Parts of the ship were in dire need of repair, but the superstructure was intact. All of its systems were dead, and looked to have failed several years ago. But any accurate reading on that was impossible. One of his squad from further back in the ship requested an interrogative. As he passed through the corridor into a relic hall, Khotan panned his stormbolt across the darkness, and Blink clicked in affirmative. "Metallurgy sample secured, brother sergeant." Khotan paused in front of the great glyph of a drake that was staring down at him from the end of a vast hall. He knew the ship was old, but Uban would know more. "Your findings take marine. Cursory analysis puts this ship at almost 10,000 years old," Uban replied. Khotan's breath caught for a moment, and he dared to hope. It was ornate, and unlike any vessel he had ever seen, and not on account of its age. Something up ahead got his attention, another door, immense, and inscribed with the same Drake sigil. It towered above Khotan, and he was still 50 feet away from it. They were deeper than the bowels of the vessel now, near the extinct forges revealed in the initial scan before incursion. A figure stood before the door. As he drew closer, almost hypnotized by each fresh discovery, Khotan saw the door had been breached. "Squad Khotan, converge on Vanguard." More corpses littered the hall. A great many congregated outside the door. In spite of the zero gravity, they floated in a strange swarm, a host of alien dead. But it wasn't this that had drawn Khotan's eye. Through the frozen bodies, their armor and void suits torn open and gouged, he saw a fireborn. Their armor was old, far older than any he had ever seen. Even the captain's artificer armor only dated back to the Arising. These suits were archaic. They would need to reach the bridge and access the data log to be certain, but as he gazed upon his long-dead brothers from another era, frozen solid in their armor, the defense having only failed when they had, he began to believe. Khotan opened up the box again. "Lord Vulkan, speak." "I have found them, Forge Master." "Hold position. I am coming to you." "The second vault?" "Empty. This is the ship Vulkan's son. It must be." "Yes, the Chalice of Fire and the Eye of Vulkan. Both are here. We have but 7 more to find." The Salamanders have countless battle honors, a record truly befitting a first founding chapter. Yet in all of them, there is but one constant. The Salamanders will always safeguard civilians. What was something that set them apart during the Heresy has now become utterly unheard of in the modern 41st millennium. Aside from those who were once Legion, the vast majority of Adeptus Astartes view normal humanity as less than hindrances, weak and worthless, utterly beneath their mighty gene-enhanced gaze. This is a statement that the Salamanders not only disagree with, but spit in the face of. For to a Salamander, the whole purpose of the Adeptus Astartes is to protect humanity. All of humanity. This has often led the Salamanders to take up critical tasks that are often overlooked by other Adeptus Astartes, purely because they believe that it is beneath them, which often leads to the Salamanders challenging, and often winning against these so-called angels of death. For how strong can you truly be if you are meant to protect the whole Imperium, but one human life is too much for you to save? A perfect example of Salamander doctrine and temperament is during the Third War of Armageddon. Armageddon, a war world, and never had a name been so accurate before. For whether by the design of the Old Ones, the fickle nature of the ruinous powers, or the sheer humors of fate, this world had been subjugated to some of the worst conflicts this galaxy had ever known, even before it was called Armageddon. Yet while many, including the demons of the Blood God, have tried to take this world, the story of Armageddon is one stained with foul green blood. As the damnable orcs have always been drawn to this world. Recently, however, they have been directed by one of the greatest of their species, the self-proclaimed prophet of their twin gods Gork and Mork, Gazgul Marg Urk Thraka. Having tried to conquer the world once already, he was thwarted by none other than the Old Man of Armageddon, Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, and the valiant men and women of the Armageddon Steel Legion, who forced the foul prophet to retreat. Yet Gazgul had returned with a vengeance. The Salamanders had fought in the previous war and paid a steep blood price for their actions. Yet it was not for nothing, as while many chapters had answered the call, it was the Salamanders who were most fondly remembered by the people of Armageddon. As to why? The answer can be summed up as follows. Most Space Marines fought for the Emperor, some to kill Xenos, others for the glories of their chapter. The Salamanders, however, The Salamanders fought for the people of the world, and the people remembered that. And so it was, and so it shall be again, that nearly the full chapter of Salamanders were deployed, as 6 companies under Tushan, the relatively new and chapter master, departed for Armageddon. And what a mark he would make. The Salamanders would take up the much neglected needs of the second and third lines of battle, such as logistics, support, defense, and most importantly, refugees. While some would claim that such deeds are a waste of time of the Adeptus Astartes, the sheer scale and ferocity of the Orc invasion meant that the mortal defenders were pushed far beyond their limit, and thus the lines were in a critical state. Yet with the arrival of the Salamanders, all that changed. With the Salamanders taking up the slack, this allowed the other Space Marines and defenders to stem the Orc tide, without worrying about the rear lines. Yet the Sons of Vulkan did not come to Armageddon just to hold ground, and thus during the lull between Orc invasion waves, the Salamanders would sally out to destroy the Orc base camps, massive Orc starships known as rocks. These abominations of metal and earth measured approximately 8 kilometers in circumference, and served as the tunneled holes in which the greenskins hid. The Salamanders chose to fight the Orcs here, not only to try and harm their offensive capabilities, but also because they were much more suited to the close quarters tunnel fighting of storming the rocks, rather than the long range duels that were common above ground. And just as 10,000 years ago, in the tunnels of old Earth, the Salamanders tore the enemy asunder. By the time of the Season of Fire, a time in Armageddon where the volcanoes of the world would erupt, and the Earth would become unstable, the Salamanders had destroyed and eradicated several thousands of Orcs and 9 rocks, noticeably harming the Orc offensive capabilities, if only for a time. The Salamanders time and again went above and beyond to aid the defenders of the world, such as when the Salamander strike cruiser Serpentine would rush the Orc blockade to deliver much needed reinforcements to the beleaguered defenders of Hive House Reach, defended by the Cruciac Gramalis of the Black Templars. 70 battle brothers under the command of Brother Sergeant Vareth had come to defend the people of House Reach, and this would cause friction with the defending Black Templars, as the Salamanders refused to take any action that might place civilians in danger, whereas the Black Templars reasoned that if they slay the Orc warlord leading the charge, the rest of the Orcs would disperse, thus taking the civilians out of danger. Whereas other Salamanders might have agreed with the Reclusiac, Sergeant Vareth was of a cautious nature, and unwilling to leave his charges undefended. Yet the aid of the Salamanders would prove telling, and the Fireborn would leave the city on decent, if shaky terms. But none could argue that the Salamanders' aid had been well met, if not exactly what was wanted. Yet Sergeant Vareth and the Salamanders would depart the city for the Hemlock River, where Chapter Master Tushan had ordered the chapter to hold the mustering Orc tide at bay. The Salamanders would continue the fight, bringing hope to those who thought that hope had seemingly deserted them, and the Sons of Vulkan continued to look out for civilian populations, making sure that those who looked to them for defense would find it in plenty. Yet while most Space Marine chapters did not share this view, one chapter in particular could be argued to actively oppose it. That being the Marines of Levelant, a chapter of an unknown lineage and founding. They have become infamous for their sheer lack of cooperation and complete and utter disregard for allies, civilians, collateral damage, or anything or anyone other than themselves. Such behavior has led to them being one of the few loyalist chapters to have no allies at all within the Imperium. Even the Mechanicum refuses to supply them with arms and armor. This has led to them looting the battlefield above friend and foe alike, earning even more ire and scorn from their supposed allies. Yet, it would not be such an act that would draw the ire of the Salamanders, but one far more callous and evil. For an Orc force of 5,000 had managed to slip into the rear lines and were approaching a medical camp known as the Emperor's Deliverance, run by the Ordo Sororitas Hospitala, with 1,000 staff of Administratum and Sisters, caring for over 12,000 refugees, most of them wounded. They will be taken hostage by the Orcs, who plan to use them as human shields. Sadly for all those involved, this would not work, as the 2 Marines Malevolent companies under Captain Vinya would respond to the threat. But it is made very clear that they care not for the camp, nor its refugees, as they would unleash a massive whirlwind artillery barrage, directly targeting the camp, killing both Orc and human alike, before surging forth into the camp, indiscriminately killing Orcs, and anyone unfortunate enough to be in the way. Many Orcs were slain, yet over 4,000 refugees had died, close to 1 refugee for every Orc slain, many of them nowhere even near an Orc. And when Colonel Destra Celestine of the Armageddon Guard Command heard of this, he demanded Captain Vinya give account of himself and his actions. Vinya would convey that he did not have the time to save them, and that those in the camp were not worthy of being saved. He would further go on to say that his force had achieved much, and had total victory. Tushan would hear of this, and publicly rebuke the captain, but that was not all the Lord of the Fireborn did. Vinya yanked off the gauntlet as he reclined on his throne in the Marines' benevolent barrack house. It was gloomy within the boxy ferrocrete structure, furnished with all the austerity expected of his puritanical chapter. The captain kept banners and trophies close at hand. It was the only ornamentation he allowed in the stock chamber, except for a broad strategium table, where a host of maps and data slates were strewn.
Change your mind, Nimok?
He asked, looking up, but finding someone else in his chambers. Vinya sneered.
You.
An onyx-skinned warrior was standing before him, armored in forest green. A scale cloak hung from his broad shoulders, attached beneath gilded pauldrons. Iconography of drakes and fire, hammers and anvils, emblazed his battle plate. His voice was abyssal deep.
I have spoken with Colonel Destria. I have also witnessed the excessive force used at the Emperor's deliverance, and have been told of the civilian casualties.
There is collateral damage in any war. If I had not acted as punitively as I did, there would still be orcs roaming around that camp. Besides, cowards are not worthy of being spared.
The green-armored warrior unhitched the thunder hammer from his back and slammed it onto the strategium table, cracking data slates and tearing maps. He was unbuckling a holstered pistol when he said,
You misunderstand the purpose of my visit, Vinya.
He looked up and his eyes flashed fire red.
This isn't a discussion.
He glanced at the gauntlets the Marines' malevolent captain had discarded.
Put those back on. I want this to be even.
Vinya was belligerent, but reached for his gauntlets anyway.
What are you talking about, Tushan?
Penance and restitution,
said the chapter master of the Salamanders. Bones cracked in his neck as he loosened them.
I'll give you one piece of advice,
he added, clenching and unclenching his fists to work the knuckles.
Don't go for a weapon.
Then, he closed the barrack room door. When the time of fire began, the war for Armageddon had technically ended, with the Great Green Prophet leaving the planet. Though fighting is ever present on that hell of a world, yet for the Salamanders, they still had duty to fulfill, as due to the time of fire, the mortal defenders of Armageddon could not operate normally and were heavily reduced in their actions. Thus, the chapter master Tushan ordered 2 companies to stay behind as a garrison, to protect the major population centers. As to those born of Nocturne, such fires were of little concern. At the same time, the chapter's tech marines busied themselves in aiding the rebuilding and reconstruction of damaged infrastructure. In addition to this, a squad of elite Fire Drake Terminators would be left with the Blood Angels as an honor guard for the fallen Captain Erasmus Tycho. Yet the war world continued its vicious cycle, and ever since the arrival of the Noctis Aetherna, demonic forces have begun to arrive on the world in mass, triggering a massive 3-way war for the world. Yet with Armageddon once again engulfed in war, its people look to the stars, for whenever there are innocents at the mercy of vile, degenerate, or the callous, the sons of Nocturne shall appear, for such is the fate of all those who defend humanity. The Salamanders are said to be the most human of all Space Marines, as they and their successors follow the Promethean Creed, which not only teaches loyalty, self-reliance, and self-sacrifice, but Space Marines of Vulkan's lineage are allowed and encouraged to spend time with their family. Whenever a company returns to Nocturne, they're given time to meet with their families and forge strong ties. This is just one of the many things that give Salamanders their humanity, yet some both in law and without have come to mistake this as weakness. Some have come to believe that the Salamanders do not possess fury and zeal like their fellow chapters. This, however, could not be more wrong, for need I remind you all that no matter how kind a dragon may be, that does not change the fact he is still a dragon, and dragon fire burns away all. A fine example of the Salamander's ability to destroy comes during the Battle of Alagros. Kazkul, rated demon of Khorne, would lead his Rage Legion, consisting of demons, demon engines, and a few mortal followers, to conquer the Alagros system. They were able to enter the material world thanks to the Noctis Aeterna, and thus the demons of the Blood God would ravage the worlds, taking many prisoners and setting up massive blood factories of bone. There they would use the human slaves as fuel and material to make demon engines. But before the system was overrun, a single message was able to be sent out, and it would reach the Salamanders. Chapter Master Tushan would personally lead the relief force, breaching through the charnel madness that was the warp at this unstable time. Yet this would come at a cost, as several librarians and navigators died in the process, and a few of the smaller ships were even lost. But the Salamanders leached the Alagros system, and here the dragons of the 18th would unleash their wrath. As blood met fire, steel clashed with brass, for dragon and bull dueled, Tushan proving his strategic prowess, and far outgenerating Kazkul, would lead the Salamanders to victory after victory, liberating world after world, even as Kazkul used his foul warp power to summon one of his legions in the Salamander's fleet. The Fireborn could not be broken, and despite many a Drake falling, the Legion would be exterminated, and the ships cleared of demonic taint. This would leave the world of Cargos Prime open and vulnerable for assault. Tushan would lead his force to the world, and link up with the remaining PDF and civilian populace. Here, he would launch a brutal campaign to destroy the blood factories, and by doing so, they would sever the demon's mortal anchor. The Salamanders would find the main stronghold of the enemy, Hive Reen, and launch a wrathful assault, making great use of land raiders and repulsors, supported by assault terminators and aggressors. And here, the wrath of the dragon proved true and deadly, for the cleansing flame of Prometheus scoured the world clean, as foul blood boiled, demon bone reduced to ash, and tainted meat was burned to cinder. Tushan, with a retinue of librarians and fire drakes, would duel Kazkul and his remaining demons, until all were slain, and Kazkul was left alone. From there, Tushan would send him howling back into the warp, cursing the sons of Vulkan as he screamed into the hell nightmare of that realm. And while the Drakes were too late to save those already turned to gory material, they could avenge them. And they did. Not only was every single demon banished back to the hell from whence they came, every trace of demonic taint was scoured from the Alagros system by Dragonfire. Just as they had appeared, so too had they disappeared. The only thing that remained of Kazkul and his Rage Legion were the troubled nightmares of those mortals who had survived the ordeal. As for the Fireborn, they would restore what they could, before continuing their righteous retribution upon the foul traitor. For the foolish servants of the Blood God had harmed the innocents of the Imperium. They had rewarded the good and the noble, those who could not defend themselves, with death and pain in a most vile and terrible manner. And lo, the wrath of the dragon had been unleashed, and now it would not stop until all who had roused its ire were left dead and broken. You have learned much about the 18th Legion and their Primarch, and most would believe that they now know what a Salamander is. But this is not true. For to truly know a Space Marine Legion, you must know what it means to be a warrior of that Legion. Not what it means to you, but what it means to them. And all we have discussed has been leading up to this point, as each part of the Salamander's history tells a different part of their story, or it represents a part of them. First, the Crucible, to be faced with heat so terrible that it would cause your very essence to change. That was the assault of the Tempest galleries. The nascent 18th was subject with a task so brutal, so gruesome, that none save for the Emperor himself believed them capable. Yet despite this, despite facing machines that outlasted civilizations, despite having the very earth be their foe, despite being hopelessly outmatched and outnumbered, they did not succumb to the heat. They would defy all, and they would win all. They would emerge from the Crucible, melted yes, but quality never put into doubt. For to be a Salamander is to be given tasks impossible, and be tried time and time again, and somehow still manage to win, no matter the cost. This is what it means to be a Salamander. Second, to be reforged. The 18th had thrown themselves against every foe, breaking them upon their shields, yet in return having themselves be broken. Despite this, and their self-sacrificing spiral, their spirit never once faltered, and even as it seemed like they would fall in a hell world, smothered by an orc horde, there was no desperation or fatalism in their eyes, only righteous fire that demanded more kindling. And so did their father answer their request, and he would give them not only salvation, but also purpose renewed. For now what many thought were two legions were now by the fires of battle reforged into one, stronger than any before. For to be a Salamander is to meet your flaws head on, and strike them again and again until they understand who is master. No matter how long or hard it might be, you will become stronger, better in every aspect. This is what it means to be a Salamander. Third, to be shattered. On the black sands of Isavander, all learn the hard truth about being a defender. You are the last to leave and the first to die. Thus was the fate of the 18th Legion. Despite their brave stand, they were bathed in nuclear fire, not once, but twice. And when all were dead, after their immortal Primarch was left breaking traitors with his bare hands, Salamander still died on Istavan. And well after that, Bravely though it may have been, they all still died. For to be a salamander is to stand when all others would flee. Not for you are the laurels of victory, nor the halls of glory, for your meat and drink are muddy blood and battered shield walls. And you are well fed. Your fate is to be shattered time and time again, and to never wish for anything else. This is what it means to be a salamander. Fourth, defiance. The journey of Vulkan and his Fireborn to reach Terra has one constant theme to it. Time and time again the Salamanders are brought to their lowest, and time again they rise, with brighter flames and louder roars. No matter how Curze tortured Vulkan, he would never yield. No matter how far Vulkan's sons were sent, if they knew they made their way back to their Primarch. No matter how many died, Vulkan's body reached Nocturne, and no matter how many tragedies and trials Vulkan faced, he still stood God. For to be a salamander is above all to be defiant until the very end, to never, ever yield. No matter what the hell may happen, you will never yield, you will never give in, you will never surrender, you will defy even the heavens themselves if you must, but you will never say die. This is what it means to be a salamander. Fifth, endurance. The saga of the Unscarred could be said to be one of tragedy, futility, bravery, insanity, and many more. But what it showed above all is endurance. No matter how many setbacks Kel and his brothers faced, they kept moving forward. When faced with sons of Horus, traitor Mechanicum, crazed Iron Hands, and even zombies, they never once faltered and continued to move forward towards their goal. No matter what may come, and even thousands of years later, their old bones still endured to stand silent vigil, wards over their own tombs. For to be a salamander is to endure any and all hardships, no matter how difficult, no matter how unexpected, no matter how insane. You will steel your resolve and adapt to the situation at hand. You will endure. No matter what, you will get it done. Whatever it might be, you will withstand it all. This is what it means to be a salamander. Sixth, duty. Upon the chem-choked lands of Armageddon, Orc, Demon, Mortal, and Space Marine all learnt what duty is to a salamander. They are the dragons of the Imperium, the life wards of humanity. They are our guardians and defenders, and if need be our avenging angels. From doing what others scorn, to unleashing their might when called upon, to rendering justice no matter how small the recompense it might be. It will be done. For that is what duty is. For that is what duty demands. For to be a salamander is to follow your duty with unwavering dedication and steely resolve. It does not matter how big or how small it might be. If it is part of their duty, it will be done. By tooth and claw, fire and flame, your duty shall be done. For duty is unto death, and salamanders are bloody hard to kill. This is what it means to be a salamander. Seventh, wrath. When the demons of bloody hell thought themselves safe to harvest the innocent of the Imperium, they would be savaged by vengeful dragon fire. No matter the cost to their own lives, the Fireborn would eradicate every single tainted stain that the demons left. For the cleansing flame spared not. For to be a salamander is to unleash a wrath so hot that none may withstand it. Vulkan was the kindest of the Primarchs, but his rage was one that not even a nuclear winter could chill. For theirs is a rage fueled by righteous retribution, their fire stoked white hot by the pain screams and sorrowful howls of the weak and innocent abused by the degenerate and craven. Thus, when a dragon speaks, you will listen, and then you will burn. For fire destroys wholly and utterly. There will be nothing left of you. This is what it means to be a salamander. All of these aspects combined are what makes a salamander a salamander. These are the 7 core elements of the 18th Legion. When you combine all of these with indomitable mastercrafted armor, a weapon that breathes flame, and a snarling thunder hammer, you get a Space Marine of the Salamanders. This is what it means to be a son of Vulkan. This is what it means to be a dragon of the Imperium. This is what it means to be a defender of humanity. This is what it means to be a warden of Prometheus. This is what it means to be a Fireborn of Nocturne. This is what it means to be a warrior of the 18th Legiones Astartes. This is what it means to be a salamander! This is why the salamanders are what they are, for this is who they are. They are the dragon warriors of the 41st millennium. They are kind men who hide a terrible wrath. For they are the Salamanders, and into the fires of battle they march, and unto the anvil of war are they tested. All this and more, for Vulkan lives!
I hope that one day I can put down my sword. Until then, I'll keep my killing edge sharp.
But yeah, hey, thank you guys also very much for watching. I do love and appreciate. This video took forever to make. This video was an absolute hell to make. Everything went wrong. It was just one of those lives, Lamau. Yeah, so please, thank you for watching all the way to the end. Like, comment, share, subscribe to all the wonderful things. Thank you, big awesome thank you to my members and patrons.
A massive shout out to my officer corps with my amazing lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Shout out to my sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Warsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Corns Butcher, Mr. Sean RL7, Mr. Bullwin, and Mr. Matthew Merrill. Shout out to my corporal tier members, Tremail the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Shauna Smithers, Tech Priest Toaster, and the Winch of Warhammer. And finally, but certainly not least, shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Waslawns, Mr. Niva_SPW, Mr. Michael Hayeda, Mr. Doris Curze, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortusunum, Mr. Gentle Salamander, Mr. CMD Nail, Mr. Simon Kamu, Mr. Dan Marek, and
Mr. Weaselhack. Thank you, each and every one of you. I love and appreciate you. Sign up today with our memberships, gain a bunch of awesome benefits, early access to videos, behind the scenes stuff, member-only content coming very soon, as well as my love and support. But remember, this will always be free, and I will love you, whether you give me $1 or not. Mwah. But ladies and gentlemen, I have been the General Brother 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, amazing people. Thank you all so very much for watching. Y'all make sure to stay salamandery out there, boys and gals. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Fucking spent months making this video, literally 2.5 hours. I know some motherfucker is gonna come in here and be like, well, fuck you. Thank you, sir. Alright, goodbye.